Everything will be okay. We're safe now. Everything will be alright. We're safe now. Everything will
The bus
be
rattled
okay.
to a
We're
stop
safe
on the
now.
dusty main street of Riverdale, releasing a cloud of diesel smoke into the autumn air. Marcus Sullivan stepped down onto the cracked pavement, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his body moving with the careful precision of someone who had learned to be alert at all times. 6 years had passed since he had last stood on this corner, 6 years since he had kissed Rebecca goodbye and promised to return before their wedding date. The town looked different, smaller somehow, as if it had shrunk in his absence. Morrison's hardware store had closed, its windows covered with faded newspaper. The old diner where he and Rebecca used to share milkshakes had been replaced by a chain coffee shop. Even the trees lining Main Street seemed older, their branches reaching across the road like arthritic fingers trying to touch something just out of reach. Marcus walked slowly, taking in every detail, comparing the Riverdale of his memory with the reality before him. People passed by, strangers mostly, young families pushing strollers, teenagers laughing at their phones. A few older faces looked familiar, but no one recognized him, this hollow-eyed man with premature gray threading through his dark hair and scars mapping stories across his weathered skin. His feet carried him automatically toward Maple Lane, toward the small cottage with the blue shutters where he and Rebecca had planned to start their life together. His grandmother had left him that house, and he had spent months before his deployment fixing it up, painting walls, repairing the porch, planting rose bushes in the front garden because Rebecca loved roses. As he turned onto Maple Lane, Marcus felt his chest tighten. The cottage came into view, but it looked nothing like he remembered. The modest structure had been expanded, a new wing added to the side. The blue shutters were now cream-colored, and the garden had been transformed into an elaborate landscape with a white picket fence and flower beds bursting with late-season blooms. His steps slowed as he approached, confusion mixing with a growing sense of dread. Through the large front window, warm light spilled onto the darkening street. Marcus moved closer, drawn by something he could not name, some instinct warning him that everything was about to change. What he saw through that window stopped his heart. Rebecca stood in the kitchen, her auburn hair longer than before, pulled back in a loose braid. She was laughing, her head thrown back in that uninhibited way he remembered from their happiest moments. But she was not alone. A tall man with sandy hair stood beside her, his arm draped casually around her waist. And there, at the kitchen table, 2 young boys sat coloring, their heads bent together in concentration, identical in their dark curls and serious expressions. Marcus watched as the man leaned down and kissed Rebecca's temple, watched as she turned into his embrace with easy familiarity. He watched as one of the boys called out something that made them both laugh, watched as Rebecca moved to the table and ruffled both boys' hair with obvious maternal affection. The scene was so perfect, so complete, that Marcus felt like an intruder just standing there on the sidewalk. This was a family, whole and happy, functioning seamlessly without any missing pieces. And he, Marcus Sullivan, was not part of it. His legs carried him backward, away from the window, away from the cottage that was no longer his, away from the life he had dreamed about through 6 years of survival. He stumbled down the street, his vision blurring, his breath coming in short gasps. The old stone church loomed ahead, its door slightly ajar, its interior dark and welcoming. Marcus pushed through and collapsed into a back pew, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of what he had just witnessed. The woman he loved, the future he had fought to return to, had moved on without him. In the silence of that empty church, Marcus Sullivan faced the devastating truth: he had survived war only to discover he had no home to return to. The creak of the church door made Marcus lift his head from his hands. Father Daniel O'Brien stood in the doorway, his white collar visible even in the dim light. The elderly priest had aged considerably, his hair now completely silver, his shoulders more stooped than Marcus remembered. "Marcus Sullivan," Father Daniel said softly, his voice filled with wonder and sorrow. "Dear God, it's really you." Marcus tried to speak but found his throat too tight. Father Daniel approached slowly and sat beside him in the pew, the wood groaning under their combined weight. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the distant ticking of the church clock. "They told us you were dead," Father Daniel finally said. 3 years ago. The military sent official notification. Your convoy was ambushed outside Kandahar. They said there were no survivors, that the remains they recovered were too damaged to identify individually. We held a memorial service right here in this church. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering that day. The explosion had been massive, the fireball consuming everything. He had been thrown clear, found hours later by local villagers who nursed him back to health in secret, afraid of retaliation from both sides. By the time he was strong enough to contact his unit, he had been declared dead, and the bureaucratic nightmare of proving he was alive had taken years to untangle. "Rebecca," Marcus managed to whisper. "I saw her. With another man and children." Father Daniel nodded slowly, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "Daniel Mitchell. He's a good man, Marcus. A teacher at the elementary school. He moved here about 4 years ago." The priest paused, choosing his words carefully. "Rebecca waited for you. For 3 years, she refused to believe you were gone. She kept the cottage exactly as you left it, wouldn't change a single thing. She wore your grandmother's engagement ring and the wedding band you gave her before you left, even though you never made it to the ceremony." The image of Rebecca in that window, wearing another man's ring, flashed through Marcus's mind. What happened? "The official death certificate came," Father Daniel continued, his voice heavy with memory. "Rebecca collapsed when I showed it to her. For months, she was like a ghost herself. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped living in any meaningful way. The whole congregation was worried about her. Her sister Ellen moved in to take care of her, but Rebecca just drifted through the days like she was underwater." Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. He had dreamed of Rebecca every night, had held on to her memory through interrogations and imprisonment, through pain and loneliness. The thought of her suffering while he fought to return home was unbearable. "Daniel Mitchell started attending our church around that time," Father Daniel went on. "He had lost his own wife to cancer 2 years earlier and understood grief in a way most people couldn't. He didn't push, didn't try to fix her. He just sat with her in the garden after services, letting her talk about you, listening to her memories. Slowly, very slowly, Rebecca began to heal. And they fell in love," Marcus said bitterly. "Not at first," Father Daniel corrected gently. "It took more than a year before Rebecca could even consider the possibility of moving forward. Daniel was patient, never asking for more than she could give. Eventually, she realized that honoring your memory didn't mean dying alongside you. She could love you and still find a way to live." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the aisle between the pews. "How long have they been married?" 2 years this past June. The twins, Christopher and Matthew, just turned 18 months old." Father Daniel watched Marcus carefully. "She never stopped loving you, Marcus. Even on her wedding day, she cried because you should have been there, because the life she was starting wasn't the one she had promised to you. But she married him anyway," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "She had his children. She made a whole new life. What else was she supposed to do?" Father Daniel asked, his tone firmer now. "Stay frozen in grief forever? Deny herself the chance at family, at happiness, at healing? You were declared dead, Marcus. Legally, officially, completely dead. She had a funeral for you. She mourned you. And then, because she's human and humans need connection and hope, she found a way to keep living." Marcus leaned against a stone column, his forehead pressed to the cold surface. The priest was right, of course. Rebecca had done nothing wrong. She had waited, she had grieved, she had eventually moved on, exactly as anyone would expect. But understanding it intellectually did nothing to ease the agony of seeing her in another man's arms, of watching her raise children who should have been theirs. "Does she know I'm here?" Marcus asked. "Not yet. But she will soon. News travels fast in Riverdale." Father Daniel stood, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You should talk to her, Marcus. Not tonight, but soon. You both deserve that closure, painful as it might be." Marcus nodded, though he had no idea what he would say to her. What words existed for this kind of impossible situation? How do you tell the woman you love that you understand why she married someone else, that you don't blame her for building a life on your grave? "You can stay in the parish house tonight," Father Daniel offered. "The spare room is always available. Tomorrow, when you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next." As Marcus followed the priest out of the church and into the cool night air, he looked back toward Maple Lane, toward the cottage where Rebecca slept beside another man, where two little boys dreamed innocent dreams in rooms that should have held his own children. The life he had fought so hard to return to existed only in memory now, a ghost as dead as he had been declared to be. Morning came too quickly. Marcus had barely slept, his mind replaying the scene through the window over and over, torturing himself with images of Rebecca's happiness without him. Father Daniel had left coffee and fresh bread on the kitchen table before heading to morning mass, a silent offering of comfort that Marcus barely touched. By mid-morning, he found himself wandering toward the town square, drawn by muscle memory to the farmer's market that Rebecca had loved. She used to drag him there every Saturday, insisting on buying fresh vegetables and homemade jam, chatting with vendors about their gardens and grandchildren. Marcus told himself he wasn't looking for her, that he just needed fresh air and familiar surroundings, but his heart knew the truth. The market was bustling, colorful stalls lined up beneath white canopies, the air filled with the smell of fresh bread and ripe apples. Marcus walked slowly between the rows, his hands in his pockets, his head down, trying to blend into the crowd. "Marcus?" The voice froze him in place. He turned slowly, and there she was, standing 10 feet away, a basket of tomatoes forgotten in her hands. Rebecca's face had gone pale, her green eyes wide with shock. She looked exactly as she had through the window, but seeing her in daylight, seeing the reality of her up close, hit him like a physical blow. "Rebecca," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. They stared at each other across the dusty path, oblivious to the people flowing around them. Marcus watched as shock gave way to recognition, recognition to disbelief, disbelief to something that looked like pain so deep it had no bottom. The basket fell from her hands, tomatoes rolling across the ground. Rebecca pressed both hands to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "They said you were dead," she whispered. "They said there was nothing left to bury." "There was a mistake," Marcus said, the phrase feeling pathetic and inadequate. "I survived the attack. It took me this long to get home." Rebecca moved toward him as if drawn by an invisible thread, then stopped abruptly, seeming to remember something. Her hand went to her left ring finger, where a simple gold band caught the morning light. Marcus saw her see him notice it, saw the guilt flash across her face, followed immediately by defensive pain. "I waited," she said, her voice breaking. "God, Marcus, I waited for 3 years. I refused to believe you were gone even when everyone told me to accept it and move on. I kept our cottage exactly as you left it. I talked to you every night like you could hear me. I was losing my mind with grief." "I know," Marcus said gently. "Father Daniel told me everything. I don't blame you, Rebecca. I don't blame you for any of it." The words seemed to break something inside her. Rebecca closed the distance between them, her hands reaching for his face, touching him as if to make sure he was real. "How is this possible? How are you here?" "I buried you, Marcus. I stood in that church and said goodbye to you. I have a memorial stone with your name on it in the cemetery." Marcus covered her hands with his own, feeling the warmth of her skin, the trembling in her fingers. "I'm so sorry. I tried to get word to you, but by the time I could contact anyone, I was already declared dead. The system, the bureaucracy, everything worked against me. It took years to prove I was alive." They stood like that, holding each other's hands in the middle of the farmer's market while curious eyes watched from every direction. Marcus saw questions forming on Rebecca's lips, saw the terrible conflict in her eyes, joy at seeing him alive warring with the reality of her current life. "We need to talk," Rebecca said finally, pulling her hands back. "But not here. Not with everyone watching." She led him to a small coffee shop on the edge of town, a place that hadn't existed before he left. They sat in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them while the words poured out. Rebecca told him everything, about the memorial service where she couldn't stop crying, about the nights she slept in his old shirts trying to hold on to his scent, about the day the official death certificate came and she finally had to accept that he was never coming home. "Daniel didn't chase me," she explained, her fingers shredding a napkin. "He just existed beside me while I fell apart. He would sit with me in the garden and let me talk about you for hours. He never tried to replace you or make me forget you. He just helped me remember how to breathe." Marcus listened, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "When did you realize you loved him?" Rebecca's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I'm not sure I can explain it. It wasn't like with you, that lightning bolt of falling in love young and reckless. It was quiet, gradual. One day I realized that I looked forward to seeing him, that his presence made the world feel less empty. And I felt so guilty, Marcus, like I was betraying you by even considering being happy again." "You weren't betraying me," Marcus said firmly. "You were surviving." "The twins," Rebecca whispered, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "Christopher and Matthew. They're my whole world now. And Daniel, he's such a good father. He reads to them every night, makes up silly songs to get them to eat their vegetables, stays up when they're sick. He loves them completely." Marcus forced himself to ask the question burning in his chest. "Do you love him?" Rebecca met his eyes, and in hers he saw truth and terrible sadness. "Yes. Not the way I loved you when we were young and everything felt possible. But yes, I love him. He saved my life, Marcus. He gave me a reason to keep living when I wanted to stop. And the boys, they're innocent in all this. They know Daniel as their father. They call him Papa and light up when he comes home from work." They talked for hours, until the coffee shop owner gently suggested they might want to continue their conversation elsewhere. Marcus walked Rebecca back to her car, acutely aware that she needed to get home to her family, to the life that had replaced him. Before she got in her car, Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "I need to show you something. Can you meet me at the old bridge tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock. There are things you need to see, things you need to understand." Marcus agreed, watching as she drove away, her face visible in the rearview mirror, still crying. He stood in the parking lot long after her car disappeared, feeling like he had just said goodbye to her all over again.